Hello, Bojo Kanawaya Ani. It's Leanne Simpson here speaking. I'm from the Anishinabek Nation, or the Mississauga Anishinabek. That's the eastern part of the Ojibwe Territory. I'm a member of Alderville First Nation. My traditional name is Patasamasuk, which means woman walking towards the earth from Grandmother Moon. I'm from the Bobcat clan, and I'm very happy to be hanging out with you in cyberspace today. Right now, what you're seeing is a series of photos from my territory of my family sort of out on the land, starting in the spring in the sugar bush and moving kind of through the different seasons. And so Sarah and Cindy asked me to come and participate today as a way of starting to think about how we can reframe family violence within the context of Indigenous thoughts and Indigenous realities in the way that we want to have de-colonial, beautiful futures. And so I'm taking a really different approach to that today. I'm going to be using Anishinaabe storytelling, music, poetry, and song, and also these photos to help us sort of reframe and revision and come up with a different or a series of different models for talking about violence. So I want to begin today by sharing with you a very old story that comes from the Anishinabek territory. I learned this story originally probably over a decade ago from Elder Doug Williams from Curve Lake First Nations. And my version of this story is called Kwezance Makes a Lovely Discovery. Kwe is a word that means woman in Anishinaabe, and Kwezance means little woman or girl. Kwezance is out walking in the bush one day. It's Zigwan, the first part of spring. The lake is opening up. The snow is finally melting. She's feeling that first warmth of spring on her cheeks. Oh, Nikichinendam, she's thinking. I'm happy. Then that Kwezance who is out walking, collecting firewood for her dodome. Dodome is a word that children call their moms, and it means my breastfeeder. Then that Kwezance who is out walking, collecting firewood for her dodome, decides to sit under Nanataguk, the maple. Maybe just stretch out, maybe have a little rest, maybe gather firewood a little later. Oh, I'm feeling happy today. And while that Kwezance is lying down and looking up, she sees a squirrel, Jidamo, up in the tree. Bojo, Jidamo, I hope you had a good winter. I hope you had enough food cached. But Jidamo doesn't look up because she's already busy. She's not collecting nuts, Gaween. She's not building her nest, Gaween. Not yet. She's not looking after any young, Gaween. It's too early. She's just nibbling on the bark and then doing some sucking. Nibble, nibble, suck. Nibble, nibble, suck. Nibble, nibble, suck. Kwezance is feeling a little curious, and so she does that too on one of the low branches. Nibble, nibble, suck. Nibble, nibble, suck. Mmm. Stuff tastes good. It's real sweet water. Then Kwezance gets thinking, and she makes a hole in that tree, and she makes a little slide for that sweet water to run down. She makes a quick little container out of birch bark, and she collects that sweet water, and she takes that sweet water home to show her mama. That dodome is excited, and she has 300 questions. Ah, Kwezance, what is this? Where did you find it? Which tree? Who taught you how to make it? Did you put tobacco? Did you say miigwech? How fast is it dripping? Does it happen all day? Does it happen all night? Where's the firewood? Kwezance tells her dodome the story. She believes every word because she is her Kwezance and they love each other very much. Let's cook the meat in it tonight. It will be lovely sweet. Nahau, nahau. So they cooked that meat in the sweet water. It was lovely sweet. It was extra lovely sweet. It was sweeter than just sweet water. The next day, Kwezance takes her mama and that tree to the tree, and her mama brings nokomis and nokomis for all the aunties, and there's a very big crowd of Michi, Sagi, and Anishinabek Kwewuk. And there's a very big lot of pressure. Kwezance tells about Chidamo. Cousins does the nibble nibble suck part. At first, there are technical difficulties and none of it works. But Mama rubs Cousins back, and she tells Cousins that she believes her anyway. And they talk about lots of variables like heat and temperature and time. And then Jesus comes out and warms everything up. And soon it's drip, drip, drip. Those aunties go crazy, sasakwe, dancing around, hugging a little bit too tight, high-kicking and high-fiving until they take it back home and boil it up and boil it down into sweet, sweet sugar. Ever since then, every Zigwan, those Machisagi Anishinabek collect that sweet water and boil it up and boil it down into that sweet, sweet sugar, all thanks to Kwezans and her lovely discovery, and to Jidimu and her precious teaching, and to Nanataguk and their boundless sharing. Last spring, while I was with my family tapping a stand of maple trees, I remembered that this is one of my favorite stories. It's one of my favorite stories because nothing violent happens in it. At every turn, Kwezans is met with very basic core Anishinaabe values: love, consent, empathy, compassion, support, and understanding. She centers her day around her own freedom and joy. I imagine myself at 7 running through a stand of maples with the first warmth of spring marking my cheeks. I imagine everything good in the world. My heart, my mind, my spirit are opened and engaged, and I feel as if I could accomplish anything. In reality, I have to imagine myself in this situation because as a child, I don't think I ever was in a similar situation. My experience of education from kindergarten to graduate school was one of coping with someone else's agenda, curriculum, pedagogy, someone who is neither interested in my well-being as a Kwezans, my connection to my homeland, my language or history, or my Anishinabek intelligence. No one ever asked me what I was interested in, nor did they ask for my consent to participate in their system. My experience of education was one of continually being measured against a set of principles that required surrender to an assimilative colonial agenda in order to fulfill those principles. I distinctly remember being in grade 3 at a class trip to the sugar bush and the teacher showing us 2 methods of making maple syrup. The pioneer method, which involved a black pot over an open fire and clean sap, and the Indian method, which involved a hollowed-out log and an unlit fire with large rocks in the log to heat the sap up, which had bark, insects, dirt, and scum over it. The teacher asked us which method we would use, and being the only native kid in the class, I was the only one that chose the Indian method. Things are different for this Kwezans. She had already spent 7 years immersed in a nest of Anishinaabe intelligence. She already understands the importance of observation and learning from her animal teachers when she watches the squirrel so carefully and then mimics its actions. She understands embodiment and conceptual thought when she takes this observation and she applies it to her own situation by making a cut in the maple tree and using a shunt. She relies upon her own creativity to invent new technology. She patiently waits for the sap to collect. She takes the sap home and she shares it with her family. Her mother, in turn, meets her daughter's discovery with love and trust. Kwezans watches as Mama uses sap to boil the deer meat for supper, and when she tastes the deer and the sweetness, she learns about reduction. When her Mama and her go to clean the pot, she learns about how sap can be boiled into sugar. Kwezans then takes her elders to the tree, already trusting that she will be believed, that her knowledge and discovery will be cherished, and that she will be heard. Kwezans learned a tremendous amount over a 2-day period, self-led, driven by both her own curiosity and her own personal desire to learn. She learned to trust herself, her family, and her community. She learned the sheer joy of discovery. She learned how to interact with the spirit of the maple. She learned both from the land and with the land. She learned what it felt like to be recognized, seen, and appreciated by her community. She comes to know maple sugar with the support of her family and elders. She comes to know maple sugar in the context of love. To me, this is what wisdom looks like within the Anishinabek context. It takes place in the context of family, community, and relation. The land, Aki, in this story is a teacher, its knowledge, its medicine. Aki holds everything that is meaningful for Indigenous nations, peoples, communities, and families. Different versions of this story happen all over our territory every year in March when the Anishinabek return to the sugar bush. Khoisan is threatened by land theft, environmental contamination, residential school and state-run education, and colonial gender violence. But Khoisan is there anyway, making maple sugar as she has always done, in a loving, compassionate reality, propelling us to create the circumstances within which this story in Anishinaabe takes place. Khoisan challenges me to rebel against my settler colonial reality and not just dream alternative realities, but create them on the ground in the physical world in spite of being occupied. Khoisan brought maple sugar to the Anishinabek. The production of maple sugar has sustained the Anishinabek for generations. It is a cornerstone of our economy. It is a medicine. It holds our stories and ceremonies. It is part of our political system. Khoisan, this little girl, changed our nation. What if Khoisan had no access to the sugar bush because of land dispossession, contamination, or global climate change? What if she was too depressed or anxiety-ridden from being erased from Canadian society, removed from her language and homeland, and targeted as a squaw, a slut, or a drunken Indian? What if the trauma and pain of ongoing colonial gender violence had made it impossible for her mama to believe her, or for her mama to reach out and so gently rub her lower back at that critical point? What if that same trauma and pain prevented her aunties and elders from gathering around her and supporting her when there were technical difficulties? What if settler colonial parenting strategies positioned the child as less believable than an adult? What if Khoisan had been in a desk at school that didn't honor at its core her potential within Anishinabek and Anishinabek intelligence, or she had been in an educational context where having an open heart was a liability instead of a gift? What if she hadn't been running around, exploring, experimenting, observing the squirrel, completely engaged in a Machisagik and Anishinabek way of knowing? What if she hadn't been on the land at all? What if Khoisans didn't fit nicely into the colonial gender binary and they had been teased or bullied to the point that they were too sad to go into the sugar bush? What if Khoisans lived in a world where no one listened to girls, or where she had been missing or murdered before she ever made it out to the sugar bush? The second story that I want to share is a reimagining of the present in order for that present to give birth to an Indigenous decolonial future that is different than the one that settler colonialism, with all of its violences, sets out for us. And it's an answer, it's a response to the question that Indigenous peoples get asked a lot, and that question is, what do you people want? I want my great-grandchildren to be able to fall in love with every piece of our territory. I want their bodies to carry with them every story, every song, every piece of poetry hidden in our Anishinaabe language. I want them to be able to dance through their lives with joy. I want them to be able to live without fear because they know in their bones what respect feels like. I want them to live without fear because they have a pristine environment with clean waterways that will provide them with the physical and emotional sustenance to uphold their responsibilities to the land, their families, their communities, and their nations. I want them to be valued, heard, and cherished by our communities and by Canada, no matter what their skin color, their physical and mental abilities, their sexual, gender, or relationship orientation. I want my great-great-grandchildren and their great-great-grandchildren to be able to live as Machisagik and Anishinabek, unharassed and undeterred in their homeland. The idea of my arms embracing their grandchildren and their arms embracing their grandchildren is communicated in the Anishinaabe word kobede. According to Elder Edna Manitowabe, kobede is a word we use to refer to our great-grandparents and our great-grandchildren. It means a link in a chain. A link in a chain between generations, between nations, between states of being, between individuals. I am a link in a chain. We are all links in a chain. Doug Williams, a Mississauga Anishinabek elder from Curve Lake First Nation, calls our nation Keenagachi Anishinabek Oguming, the place where we all live and work together. Our nation is a hub of Anishinaabe networks. It is a long Kobode cycling through time. It is a web of connection to each other, to the plant nations, to the animal nations, the rivers, the lakes, the cosmos, and our neighboring Indigenous nations. Keenagachi Anishinabek Oguming is an ecology of intimacy. It is an ecology of relationships in the absence of coercion, hierarchy, or authoritarian power. Keenagachi Anishinabek Oguming is connectivity based on the sanctity of the land, the love we have for our families, our language, our way of life. It is relationships based on deep reciprocity, respect, non-interference, self-determination, freedom. Our nationhood is based on the idea that the earth is our first mother, that natural resources are not natural resources at all, but gifts from our mother. Our nationhood is based on the foundational concept that we should give up what we can to support the integrity of our homelands for the coming generations. We should give more than we take. It is nationhood based on a series of radiating responsibilities. This is what I understand our diplomats were negotiating when settlers first arrived in our territory. This was the impetus for those very first treaties: Anishinaabe freedom, protection for the land and the environment, a space, an intellectual, political, spiritual, artistic, creative, and physical space where we could live as Anishinaabe and where our Kobode could do the same. This is what my ancestors wanted for me, for us. They wanted our generation to practice Anishinaabe governance over our homeland, to partner with other governments over shared lands, to have the ability to make decisions about how the gifts of our mother would be used for the benefits of our peoples in a manner that would promote her sanctity for the coming generations. I believe my ancestors expected the settler state to recognize my nation, our lands, and the political and cultural norms in my territory. My nationhood just doesn't radiate outwards, it also radiates inwards. It's my physical body, my mind, my spirit. It's our family, not the nuclear family that has been normalized in settler societies, but big, beautiful, diverse, extended multiracial families of relatives and friends that care very, very deeply for each other. This is the intense love of land, of family, and of our nations that has always been the spine of Indigenous resistance and resurgence. The fact that I'm here today is a miracle because it means like my family, like every Indigenous family, did whatever they could to ensure that I survived the last 400 years of violence. In order for my Kobode to survive and flourish the next 400 years, we need to join together in a rebellion of love, persistence, commitment, and profound caring. To end my presentation today, I want to share with you a short film. It's 2 minutes long. It's called Leak, and it's based on an incident that took place about 5 years ago in my territory. My daughter, Minawewe Beneshi, and I, and Doug Williams, the elder that I spoke about earlier, and some other friends were harvesting wild leeks, which are like a wild onion in our territory. And on the way home, my daughter was riding with the elder for the first time, and we came across a roadblock. And one of the workers for the county yelled at their car, and he yelled racist, horrible things at their car. And so we drove away, and Doug had to stop the car and bring my daughter back to me, and she was collapsed and crying and crying and crying. It was her first experience with racism and with this kind of violence. It was her first experience with violence. I felt really guilty and ashamed as a parent because I didn't protect her, and because in that moment I didn't use my words and I didn't speak back to him. My concern was for her. And so over the next few months I tried to speak with her about this because I wanted to make sure that she didn't feel ashamed and she didn't feel wrong. I wanted her to know that she didn't do anything wrong, that she had done everything right. But every time I went to talk to her, she would just get so upset. There was no conversation. So I was speaking about the event to a friend of mine, Tara Williamson, who is a Korean Anishinaabe singer-songwriter, and she suggested that I process it, that I was traumatized by it as well. And I told her I didn't know how, and she said, "You're a poet, you should write a poem." So I wrote this poem called Leaks to Minaway, and I sent it to Tara, and a few weeks later she sent a song back. We performed the song in our community a few times, and then we were approached by Cara Mumford, who is a Métis filmmaker in Peterborough, and she asked if she could make this film. A few weeks later, she asked if Minaway would dance in the film, and Minaway agreed. And so a year later, this group of Indigenous women went leek picking, and we took Minaway, and we went back to the scene in this loving way, and we shot this film, and Minaway was happy, and they were able to talk to her in a way that I wasn't, and heal her. And so at the end of the year, we had this beautiful film